Every generation gets a story. The greatest generation got sacrifice and glory. The boomers got rock and roll and the American dream. Millennials got participation trophies and think pieces written about them every single week. Gen X got a key, a house key on a string around their neck, and instructions to let themselves in after school, make a snack, and not bother anyone until dinner. No one wrote think pieces about Gen X. No one made documentaries about their struggles. No one sat them down and said what you went through was hard. They were just fine, capable, quiet. They figured it out. They always figured it out. And here's what's genuinely fascinating to me, as someone who studies how childhood conditions shape adult psychology, is that figuring it out alone, over and over again from the age of 8 or 9, doesn't just build character, it rewires a brain. And that rewiring explains almost everything about why Gen X is different from every generation that came before or after them.
Let me be clear about something first, because I know some of you are already thinking it. This isn't about blaming parents. This isn't about saying Gen X had it worse than everyone else. And if you grew up in that era and you're watching this, I want you to hear this directly. If you spent your childhood feeling like your emotions were inconvenient, like your needs were too much, like the right thing to do was to just handle it, you weren't too sensitive, you weren't weak. You were a child learning to survive an environment that wasn't designed around you. And that matters, because the coping strategies a 9-year-old builds to survive become the default operating system of the 45-year-old. Think about the Gen X manager who is genuinely excellent at her job, calm in a crisis, resourceful, doesn't need hand-holding, but finds it almost physically uncomfortable when someone asks how she's really doing. Not because she's cold, because emotional check-ins weren't part of the childhood curriculum. Or the Gen X father who loves his kids fiercely, but sometimes catches himself pulling back when things get emotionally messy. Not because he doesn't care, but because pulling back was the only emotional regulation tool he was ever given. Or the one who overthinks every relationship, not because they're anxious by nature, but because they learned early that depending on people was a risk their nervous system still hasn't fully accepted. These aren't character flaws.
These are adaptive responses that outlived the conditions that created them. And the psychology behind all of it is far more specific and far more fascinating than most people realize.
So what actually happened inside the developing Gen X brain? Here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Your brain builds its core operating system in childhood, specifically how it answers 3 fundamental questions. Is the world safe? Can I depend on other people? And am I worth taking care of? For most Gen X kids, the answers came back complicated. Harvard researchers studying childhood adversity found something that reframes this entire conversation. They discovered that children who consistently self-regulate, who manage stress, solve problems, and process emotions largely alone, develop what psychologists call a highly autonomous stress response. What that means for you is this: their nervous system learned to treat needing help as a vulnerability rather than a normal human function. Be honest, does that sound familiar? The latchkey childhood didn't just teach Gen X to be independent, it taught their brains that independence was the only safe option. And a brain that learns that lesson at age 8 carries it into every meeting, every relationship, every moment someone offers help they're not sure they're allowed to accept. There's also something fascinating happening with loss aversion here. A brain raised in low-stability conditions becomes hyper-vigilant about protecting what it has, because it learned early that things disappear without warning. That's not pessimism. That's a nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do. Now, and I want to be careful here, because Gen X does not need to be fixed. What they need, what maybe you need if you're watching this and recognizing yourself, is a reframe, a way of understanding the operating system well enough to choose when to run it and when to update it. I know what you're thinking. I've been this way my whole life. This is just who I am. Stay with me, because that thought, that's the operating system talking. Technique 1. Earns secure attachment rebuilding. Attachment theory, Mary Ainsworth, and updated research, University of California. Why it works. Attachment styles formed in childhood aren't permanent. Research shows that consistent, safe relational experiences in adulthood can literally update the brain's prediction about whether depending on others is dangerous. The brain is more plastic than the 9-year-old inside you believes. At work, practice 1 micro-disclosure per week, not vulnerability theater, just something real. That was harder than I expected is enough. You're giving your nervous system evidence that honesty doesn't end relationships. In personal life, when someone offers help, try accepting it once without immediately reciprocating. Notice the discomfort. That discomfort is the old operating system running, not the truth about what you deserve. Technique 2. Self-distancing. Ethan Kross, University of Michigan. Why it works. Referring to yourself in third person deactivates the brain's self-critical processing and allows you to evaluate your own patterns the way you'd evaluate a friend's, with more compassion and less judgment. For a generation that learned to be their own harshest critic, this is genuinely powerful. At work, when you catch yourself pushing through something painful alone, ask, what would I tell a colleague who is dealing with this exact situation? Then, actually follow that advice. At home, when an old pattern shows up, pulling back, dismissing your own needs, handling everything alone, name it out loud in third person. Your name is doing the thing again. Naming it creates distance. Distance creates choice. Technique 3. Values clarification. Acceptance and commitment therapy. Stephen Hayes. Why it works. Gen X's autonomy isn't a wound to be healed, it's a genuine strength that needs a conscious framework. Values clarification helps distinguish between I'm doing this because I genuinely choose to and I'm doing this because asking for help still feels dangerous. One is freedom, the other is the 9-year-old still running the show. At work, write down 3 things you do entirely alone that you could involve someone else in. Ask yourself honestly, is the solo approach serving your values or protecting your nervous system? In relationships, identify one area where you consistently undercommunicate what you need, not because you don't have needs, but because somewhere along the way, having needs felt like a burden. Then, communicate that one thing, once. See what happens. The goal isn't to become someone who needs constant validation. The goal is to have the choice to need sometimes, to ask sometimes, to let someone in sometimes without your nervous system treating it like a 5-alarm emergency.
Here is what I want Gen X to hear, maybe for the first time in a very long time. You weren't raised without applause because you didn't deserve it. You were raised in a specific historical moment, post-war prosperity, shifting family structures, parents who were themselves figuring it out that simply didn't prioritize the interior lives of children. You weren't too independent, you weren't too guarded, you weren't too self-sufficient. You were a child who built the best possible shelter from the materials you were given. The shelter worked, you survived, you're here. The question now isn't whether you needed more back then. You did. The question is, what do you want to build now that you get to choose the materials?